We heard of this incredible background, so interesting. Could you share with us, if you would, more about those experiences and how they shaped you for what you're doing currently?
Thank you very much. First of all, the microphone, if I guess it's working okay, you can all hear me. That's good. Thank you all for being here. It's kind of a humbling experience. I had a bet with my brother that there would be about 30 people. So I guess I'm going to have to pay up again. There's people here from my grade school class, my high school class from Holland, Michigan, and points beyond. So, and of course, parishioners at St. Jude's. As you all know, I'm an Augustinian, obviously, and that would be one big part of the answer. I have personally a great debt to the order of St. Augustine, to St. Augustine himself, in whose philosophy, theology, thought, humanity, that great love of Augustine for God's Word, that infinite searching for truth, for himself and for God in himself, and for everything that Augustine taught in terms of communion and community. That marked my life. And so I want to express my appreciation to the Augustinians and the whole order, those who are here this evening, and so many others who were part of my formation. One of them just passed away this afternoon, and I want to mention him because he was my teacher in high school, Father Reinhard Sternemann. Lived a good life. He was about 90 years old, but he was at Holland for my years there, and was a really dedicated teacher and Augustinian, like so many others, some of you who are here as well. The ministry that one does obviously shapes one's life, but people shape your lives, our lives, my life. And so I would say that in a very significant way, my years as a young priest, I worked here at St. Jude's. Most of you won't remember that. Before this church was built, in the old church, I was living at Providence, and I would come here on some weekends, a couple times a month at least, and helped out here, as many of us do when we go to parishes. So St. Jude's, it's like, in a little sense, a homecoming for me, and I'm glad to be back here this evening. But of course, I think the part of ministry that most shaped my life was Peru. I was there for over 20 years total. About 12 years as an Augustinian, doing parish work, pastor, professor in the seminary, director of formation, and lots of other things that when you're a missionary, you just learn how to do everything from electronics to auto mechanics and things like that. The people of God, I just can only say how gifted I feel because of what I gained from my years working in Peru. I hope that every priest can say that about wherever he works, because I'm so convinced that if we open our lives and our hearts to serve others, we indeed, like the gospel says, receive 100-fold in this life. And that certainly has been the case for myself. So there are some significant elements there in terms of shaping who I am. I don't know if I'm anticipating a question or not, but there's another whole dimension that I know Pope Francis had in mind when he asked me about taking on the role that he has assigned me to. Being in leadership in the church is another formative experience, whether it's a religious provincial or prior general, which I, as you heard, did for 12 years as prior general, and then as bishop for about 9 years in Peru. And then he called me, and specifically because he didn't want someone from the Roman Curia to take on this role. He wanted a missionary. He wanted someone from outside. He wanted someone who would come in with a different perspective and assist him in a very specific ministry, which perhaps we can talk about a little bit more later. So those are some of the aspects that I would mention. I'm sure there are many others, but in the interest of going on to another question and not boring you too much with that, I'll say that's
Thanks
enough
so
for
much.
now.
So there is an obvious question. What does the prefect of the Diccastery for bishops do?
Well, I'm still in on-the-job training. It's been about a year and 5 months or so since I actually moved in. And it was jumping into the deep end of the pool, because I finished my time in Peru as Bishop of Chiclayo on Easter Sunday of last year, 2023. I flew to Rome on Easter Monday, and I was sworn in. I arrived at midnight, if you will, on Wednesday, and that following morning at 10 in the morning, I went to the Diccastery, took the oath of office, and started working. So I went from what was being bishop of a diocese, which has about 1,200,000 people, and parishes on the coast and in the mountains, and a university, and a lot of different things, schools, etc., into this job in Rome, which is basically responsible for a good portion of the bishops in about 70% of the world. There are two other dicasteries that oversee the naming of bishops, obviously with the popes. The Pope makes all appointments to bishops, so he appoints the bishops, but he needs assistance in this, obviously. There's about 5,000 dioceses and prelatures and vicariates that have to be looked over. So I began this job, and I'm still learning, but it is certainly fascinating. It's an education. It's kind of like formation in international affairs of the church, as well as sometimes politics. I'll just mention one country, because if I get into this, I don't know if I'm being live streamed, but it could be dangerous, whatever. Venezuela right now. The Holy Father just appointed 3 archbishops in Venezuela 1 month before the elections. In Venezuela, to become a bishop, the president of the country has the right to veto the appointment. So as you're doing if you will, the study of different candidates for any position, you also have to consider the social dimension, obviously the ecclesial dimension. What is the economic situation in the country? What are these men like? Who will bring the needed gifts to a given diocese? And obviously, not every diocese is the same. So you may have somebody who's a true saint, but to send him to this diocese, he may not be a good fit. So you have to do all of these things. Obviously, there's a lot of people who work on this at different levels, from the local level, from the level of the regional and national bishops' conferences, the papal nuncios, the Diccastery, which has a staff of about 20 people, and then the plenary sessions where people come from around the world to take part in the discernment, which is then given to the Holy Father. And we say, these 3 candidates are good candidates. I meet with the Holy Father frequently, during most of the year, at least once a week, and we go through all of this to kind of make the best appointments. A lot of prayer, a lot of discernment, a lot of trusting the Holy Spirit. And I have to say, Pope Francis is an incredible guy to work with and for. He has a memory. He's going to be 88 in December, and he doesn't forget a thing. And even now, I mean, he knows people, he remembers people, if he met them, if he heard things, et cetera, et cetera. So we go through all of this together. And so the primary dimension of the job is assisting Pope Francis in this important mission as successor of St. Peter to find the best successors to the apostles to continue to lead the church. There are other dimensions. Ongoing formation for bishops, as Bishop Ron can tell you all, when we're all appointed bishops, during the first year, generally speaking, we all go to Rome for what we call baby bishop school, or new bishops formation. And it can vary from a week to 2 weeks, but it's kind of like orientation and the opportunity to present different topics that are important in a bishop's ministry. And also very important, sometimes it's the best part, so that bishops meet other bishops from around the world. It is so important for all of us. I mean, our lived experience for all of you is you belong to a parish and you know a parish community that's fundamental in living our lives of faith. But we belong to the Catholic Church, Catholic meaning universal. And there's a sense of that each one of us has, especially a bishop who has a local community, if you will, a diocese, but he does that in community with all the dioceses, not only in a country, but around the world. So to have the opportunity to get to bishops from all over is actually a conferencing, which hopefully reaches all of the faithful, not just the bishops. And this year, this is something new, but we are actually doing the course combined. I mentioned earlier, there are 3 dicasteries that deal with the search for new bishops. The Dicastery for Bishops, the Dicastery for Evangelization, which basically is in charge of looking for bishops in Africa and Asia. The Dicastery for Eastern churches, so the bishops of the Eastern Catholic churches are, if you will, selected through a different process through that dicastery. This year, we're going to do the course together so that bishops from Africa, Asia, United States, Europe, etc., we all will have the opportunity to come together and to get to know one another, at least on a surface level. But it's very interesting because I've met numerous bishops who will talk about the relationships that began when they came to Rome for this first experience. For many of them, it's the first time they go to Rome. And so to meet the Holy Father personally, to pray in the places, the tombs of St. Peter and St. Paul, again, part of our faith life is directly connected, of course, to prayer and to this long line of connectedness, if you will, with Jesus Christ through the apostles. So this experience in Rome is actually a very, very positive thing. So those choosing new bishops, forming bishops, accompanying bishops with ongoing formation, which we're also looking for new ways to accompany bishops in their ministry. And every once in a while, I hope you all don't read the internet, but there are little problems with a few bishops in the world. And those also pass over my desk. And we have to find ways of accompanying them and helping them in their ministry. So those are the primary things that I do as prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops. It'd be another whole talk to talk about president of the commission. There's the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, but you're not Latin. Well, some of you are Latin American, but most of you aren't, and so we'll leave that for another evening.
Just a quick follow-up on that. You said, I think you said that there was a staff of about 20, and so are these from all over the world, people from different geographic areas, and are they predominantly involved in research? Is that their function?
Yeah, so this is not a complaint to the headquarters, but we're understaffed. There are budgetary issues, but we don't need to go there. Yes, most of them are from the different countries we serve so that we can at least cover the language groups, if you will. Spaniard, we have several Latin Americans. We have from the United States, Germany, Poland, Croatia, etc. So yeah, the big thing is languages, because we get reports in all kinds of languages, but also in terms of preparing the paperwork that comes in. The mail that comes in most days that's first put on my desk if you start out would be, a pile like that, which then I go through and then we begin to distribute it to the different offices, who's going to deal with what. But it's in a sense, it's a very significant both research study, looking for other information to kind of supplement those things.
Great, thanks. So you've been working in Rome now for a while. During much of Francis's pontificate, you've gotten to know Pope Francis personally. Can you share some insights, experiences, stories that perhaps we've not picked up from, U.S. media, and maybe a little bit more about your personal relationship with him?
Well, the best stories I can't tell here. But if you catch me in the parking lot, maybe one or two. First of all, I guess, transparency. I first met Pope Francis when I was prior general, and he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires. We had met on several occasions there, and for different reasons. There were a lot of Augustinians in Argentina, and so when I would go there, at times we would have different kinds of celebrations, or at the Catholic University, or whatever, visits, things like that. So we got to know each other there. I'll tell you, without going into detail, that on one of the occasions, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires was interested in a specific Augustinian doing a specific work. And I, as prior general, said, I understand your eminence, but he's got to do something else. And so I transferred him somewhere else. And I was told that he wasn't happy about that, as can happen, And I said to myself when he became Pope, I said, he probably won't remember me, I thought naively. And secondly, he'll never appoint me bishop. And so then the next meeting with him, he was elected on March 13th, 2013. That was my last year's prior general, and sort of as a whim, this has never happened in the history of the order. I said to the General Council, let's write a letter to Pope Francis and see if he will come and celebrate the opening Eucharist for the chapter of the Augustinian order. We've been in order since 1244, and the Pope has always sent delegates. A Pope has never presided. So I write this letter to him, and he said yes. And then it was like, oh my God, now what do we do? The Pope is coming. So we organized the opening celebration at St. Augustine's in Rome. Some of you have been to Rome, it's near Piazza Navona. And after Mass, that's a long story, but I mean, he was really good. And he greeted one by one every member of the chapter. And then he and I went off to talk a little bit. And not only did he remember me, but it's like footnotes. But he said to me something that, apart from that little event that I told you about, there was another incident where I intervened sort of in his favor in one of the dicasteries in Rome. And he said to me, I'll never forget what you did. And I said, that's all right, Holy Father, you can forget it if you like. But he didn't forget, obviously. So from that, eventually came about what you heard Father Bray read. He named me a bishop in Peru to go back to Peru. And then 9 years later, he brought me to Rome. So I have known Francis for a long time. And again, I can give a lot of personal testimony that his memory is as good as I said earlier. But working with him, he has a profound commitment to justice and charity and mercy. And his pastoral sense, which sometimes confuses some people, is so acute that he really tries to live in a profound way what the gospel says. On one occasion, I was bishop in Chiclayo. I was there. I had an audience with him. We were talking and stuff. And we were dealing with the unfortunate situation of a case of sexual abuse. And bishops have to deal with that all the time, unfortunately. We try to be, as respectful as we can, first and foremost with the victims, but also with the community. So many people are hurt and affected by this. And so it can be a real struggle. And that we were just sharing some thoughts on that. And he said, wait here, I want to show you something. He went to his room and he brought back a picture of a carving of, it was from a Gothic cathedral in France with these columns and what do we call the capitelle in Italian? We learned this in grade school. The tops of the columns that are carved, capital, do we say that? Say that again? Well, whatever, you get my point. There was a carving from this cathedral of Judas after he had taken his own life, and Jesus next to him holding the body of Judas in his arms. And he said, well, there's nothing dogmatic about this, what could that mean? And, there's no need to get into the whole question about heaven and hell, and yes, they exist and that. But it's like, is it possible to think that God's mercy can indeed reach out to the worst of sinners? And that message in Francis' life, I mean, we get upset, I don't, but some people get terribly upset. They say, well, he should speak stronger on this, and he should condemn that and that. Pope Francis says, there's a lot of people who are condemning things already. We don't need that. We need people, and especially ministers, who can live and express and offer to others the mercy and forgiveness and healing of God. And that's what it's all about, he says. And if we could only come to understand that, I mean, and again, as I say, this is an authentic part of who Francis is. When he was elected Pope, March 13th, his first public Mass was on March 17th, 2013, in a church that happens to be the Augustinians. So I was there too. And his homily was about the adulterous woman. It was a Sunday of Lent when they want to stone this woman who was caught in adultery. And his homily was about mercy. And then from there, of course, you all will remember in 2018 or 16, there was the Jubilee, extraordinary Jubilee of Mercy, the whole church. That's a big part of who Francis is. Justice in terms of seeking, true justice for all people, especially for the downtrodden. Reaching out to help the poor and the suffering and the immigrants and those who most need the mercy of God, who most need the church, perhaps. That's who Francis is. And all the other stuff is has to be almost like interpreted and placed in that context. Because he really believes deeply, and he really struggles to find the best way to express that message of the gospel.
So obviously Francis has had a number of important